So my talk this evening will report on our recent project called the Earliest Village People project, supported by an Australian Research Council Discovery Grant that involved 3 seasons of survey, excavation and analysis from 2022 to 2024, just after COVID. And it's focused on the site of Wadi Hammeh 27 in Jordan and also about its environmental setting. And just to give a few details, here is the site. It lies about 2 kilometres north of the village of Tabakat Fahal and Irbid Fahal, ancient Pella itself. It lies about 83.5 metres below sea level. The site dates from 12,000 to 12,500 BCE and is attributed to a period called the early Natufian period. It's one of the regions and the world's first village settlements founded by hunter-gatherers in the late Pleistocene or late Ice Age. Here are a few notes about it. The dates. These people founded the world's first villages in the terminal Pleistocene in the Levant. They were complex hunter-gatherers who intensively harvested and processed wild plant foods, developed a sophisticated toolkit, an array of art items, and developed the first complex long-range exchange networks in the Levant, particularly in terms of molluscan seashells and basaltic materials. So I'm leading up to talking about our recent 3-year field season, but I'm going to put that in context by reviewing the earlier ones so that people know where we've come from. And I did 8 seasons as a postgraduate student and a postdoctoral fellow from 1983 to 1990 when I was at the University of Sydney. And then 3 more between 2014 and 2016 of excavation at La Trobe under a prior ARC Discovery grant. And then finally, the most recent one, the Early Village project. And a theme that I'll return to from time to time tonight is how 12 excavation seasons have not been enough to exhaust and characterise the cultural variability of this remarkable site. There are always new cultural forms that appear each year, and it's still going. So we stay, our base in Jordan is the Australian Dig House on ancient Pella at Fahal, and we're able to stay there by courtesy of the Department of Antiquities of Jordan and by courtesy of Stephen, the Australian manager of the complex. We've also got a number of Sydney staff and students still involved in the recent work, which I'll describe as we go on. So first, since we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of anything is a long time in anyone's span. The undertaking of funded fieldwork by University of Sydney in Jordan and the foundation, I understand, of the Australian Embassy in Jordan. And so that set me thinking about my own span, because I realised with a start that I've been involved in studying or working in Middle Eastern archaeology for 94% of that 50-year period. And that, of course, means one thing. You've got old. And you're nearly at the end of your span. And I'm, of course, not the only one. But I always recall the late Barry Humphries saying, everybody kind of expects to get old, but gee, it comes on awfully fast. So I want to make a few comments about time itself, which I think is one of the instigators of people's interest in archaeology in order to place them. And I'm taken by this comment by the Portuguese scholar Isabel Sargento, who's relating this to Greek mythology. He says, when we talk about time, we cannot help mentioning Kronos, the melancholic Greek god par excellence. Just as Kronos used to swallow his children as soon as he generates them, the past devours the present uninterruptedly. Time is therefore linked to the idea that everything that is behind is over. Time is related with the end, and thus time is connected with the death of something and also with death itself. Kronos, after being defeated by his son Zeus, was also condemned to live in the world of the dead, to live in death, using Benjamin's words, to live in the place of eternal mournfulness. And I think that line, the past devours the present uninterruptedly, is a really powerful phrase. And of course, time is the pressure behind all of our lives. And I hadn't realised how troubling it is to so many people until I happened to listen into an interview with a famous writer and actor who'd suffered deeply from depression all of his life. And that person was Spike Milligan. And Spike Milligan, in this interview, the interviewer asked him, Spike, what makes you sad? And he said, the slipping away of time and all of my memories and most cherished experiences like sand through my fingers, and that they don't exist anymore. So I thought that was a really telling point, because I think probably everyone thinks about that. I've always thought about time too, but I've never been depressed about it because of archaeology. But I've always found that archaeology gives me a context when I'm studying something from 14,000 years old, to put my 50 years of work, 94% of 50 years working in context, and that it gives me a kind of chain of connection to really important events back to the founding of villages. And I find a kind of solace in that. And so to be involved in digging a key site like Wadi Hammeh 27, and to help bring those village pioneers back to our knowledge in the recent world, I think has been a great privilege. And I expect there's quite a sense of security for many of people like the NEEF volunteers and staff who've gone to dig at Pella, because according to another writer, it's not all over. As William Faulkner said, the past is never dead, it's not even past. All of us labour in webs spun long before we were born, webs of heredity and environment, of desire and consequence, of history and eternity. So the ancient Bronze Age and Iron Age inhabitants of Pella had for comfort their great temple for 700 years in its varying forms. It rooted them in their belief system. Similarly, I think for those who've dug it, a sense of that origin of some of our major religious beliefs. And I've always found that doing this kind of work is to get what really happened in the human past, and also a sense of comfort from the various kind of scarcely believable ethno-religious narratives, particularly in this part of the world, that ancestors developed, which weren't really all that persuasive. So let's move on to this period. All large, we'll call them villages, all large Natufian hamlets or villages with buildings overlying numerous human burials or cemeteries are located within this zone in the southern Levant. And this hamlet type represents a really important transition to human residential strategies. And it's really curious, and you'll find these always mentioned in all of the archaeology textbooks, but it's really curious how rare they are. In the southern Levant, in the Mediterranean region, there's only two big ones, Ain Malaha in northern Galilee and Wadi Hammeh 27. There are also slightly earlier than that, also curiously, the earliest houses in caves. in three important sites in Mount Carmel, Hayonim, Kabara, and El Wad. I'll also talk about a very important site a bit later in northeast Jordan called Shubaika 1. And similarly to the cave sites, another extremely important series of houses in Dederia Cave in North Syria. So it reminds me of a comment made by Cam Petrie about the famous Indus Valley civilization, which is world famous, and their great cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. And he said, it's really curious, there aren't many of them. It's only a few of them in this vast area. So that's an intriguing thing. So what we found in the site is that only 30 centimetres to half a metre below the surface was a very well preserved village dating in the top phase to 14,000 years ago or 12,000 BCE. And we dug structure 1 and structure 2, two very, very large oval ellipsoid houses. And then the thing I'll talk about in a minute that Stephen was talking about was a sondage was there of these three monumental slabs. The reason I put that, we say luck, it is luck really. The reason I put that sondage there was we did a survey. I thought, why not here? Because this is the point where there's most finds and most varied finds. And as my one of my mentors, to just elaborate on Stephen's lucky Phil line, one of my mentors, Phil McCumber, the geologist who found the site, said, in academia, there's three things you need, three qualities you need. One is luck, the other is a modicum of talent, and the third is a lot of really hard work. And I'm really sure I've had 2 out of the 3. Really hard work. So I'll leave the other one to that judgment. So what we did though, our aim was to try and clear a village plan for the main part. And that was in the white is the upper phase 1 architecture. The black things are predominantly rodent burrows and the white things are limestone rocks. And we only dug down, we wanted to dig through and get the extent of the site. So we dug a sondage of about 5 metres by 2 and a bit metres in the pink area. So that was the only place we had dug to the bottom, and that gave us 4 constructional phases. The recent series of excavations when I was at Latrobe have furthered that by excavating the purple area down to bedrock in that structure 1. It took a lot of time. It's a rich site in terms of flakestone tool artefacts. I catalogued, analysed and catalogued about 500,000 from the University of Sydney digs, and one of my students going down through the next 3 phases in the purple area catalogued 490,000 more. So nearly 1 million artefacts of stone tools have been catalogued, as well as all of the other beautiful things we find. And when you got to whenever you get to the bottom in these Natufian sites, well, at this one, Anan Malaha, you inevitably find burials. And you see here the phase 2 wall in the background underlying the top phase. And at the base was feature 8, a human burial, an individual adult with a big stone placed on the thorax, possibly so it couldn't get up and work away. As usual in these things, it was discovered in the Bork. The legs were discovered in the Bork, and we had to dig the bottom, that half out, and then many years later come back with Ben Churcher digging down the Bork out to get the head in. And interestingly enough, next to it was a curious pit marking the position that was filled with a lot of burnt debris and 3 layers of stone pavement, and it was capped by a layer of big cobbles on top, as if to mark that position. And then, as so often in the site, Right through all those phases, those burials and those markers continued to be marked through some 500 years. So, for example, in the phase overlying this, on top of that pit is a stone circle or a hearth in the phase 3 floor. And so that phase 3 floor is below the pedestal phase 2 wall, and on top of that's the phase 1 wall. So we were lucky to have very rapid sedimentation and buildings right on top of each other, because Natufian stratigraphy is often very difficult to find radiocarbon dates. And it's very rare at this time depth to get a site where we can say we've got 6 constructional phases within a 500-year period. You usually don't get that much, apart from dating, physically separable layers at that time depth. So that's one of the benefits of the site. And it's one of the only sites to only be in this big formative early Natufian period rather than the later parts. Also, if we look west through the house at the phase 1 excavations, this big curious stone platform, which we call feature 7 there, and it was actually ringed by some upright stones. So we wondered what that was all about sitting in the middle of that house. You'll see another couple of stone circles against the walls and near it, and these things continue all the way down. Now, one of the most striking things about the upper phase was structure 2, which is a curious house of 3 concentric walls, focused on this pile of immense boulders, and facing onto that were these 3 incised slabs with this. These were some of the world's first monolithic sculpture. And I like to say when I talk about it, it is the largest and most complex pre-Neolithic building found in the world. Hoping that someone in the audience will put up their hand and say, no, it's not, so that when I publish it, I'm not wrong, but no one has yet. So we'll see how that goes. And so these are extremely important things because remarkably, the plan of the building appears to repeat the motif on the slabs, this central boss surrounded by 3 concentric or quadricentric rings. And so Janine Major, who is one of the first of the 5 PhD students, I'll talk about their work tonight, had done an analysis. We'd already talked about this, but the spur-thighed tortoise, a local tortoise, Testudo greca, is very important throughout Natufian period in terms of a prey animal and an animal associated with rituals like burials. And if you try to abstract the motif, like this concrete tortoise has done, I found in a bunning store in the Melbourne suburbs of Melbourne, come up with something very like the motif on the Natufian slabs, this repetitive motif. And so it either is this kind of ritual associated with the tortoise repeated in the plan of the building, and we see, as I said, in the later Natufian, important tortoise finds in ritual graves. That's how I look at it. The other way you can look at it, in the old days when the TV went off, you had the test pattern came on at 2 a.m. and maybe they just stared at this thing all night, think, wow, isn't that grand? You know, I mean, no one else has got this. We've got sort of a stone test pattern. So Janine published her PhD thesis in the greatest comprehensive analysis of all Natufian art, and came to some important conclusions. So now in the New Jordan Museum, Wadi Hammeh 27 forms a kind of entree to Jordanian heritage. And those 3 slabs, for historical reasons, were dispersed to the corners of the world. Only the lonely original in the middle is in the Jordan Museum. The other one to the right, they've had a cast from a print, 3D print, is in the Dar as-Saraya Museum, Department of Antiquities Museum in Irbid. And the third one was sent to Australia and has been in a storeroom in the National Gallery of Australia for many years. And I've been trying to get that repatriated. And only early this year, I was delighted to get an email from senior curator Bronwyn Campbell, who said they have a repatriation policy and it's going home. And I'm really delighted to see that this important part of Jordanian heritage will be back with its brother. And the director of the museum I'd said, maybe if you can get the one back from Irbid, we could try getting one back from Australia. He said, Dr. Phillip, it doesn't work like that. You get the one back from Australia, we might have half a chance of getting the third one back from Irbid. So I'm hoping that the three amigos will one day be back together in the Jordan Museum. And that's happening as we speak, apparently. So that's a really great outcome. And I really congratulate Bronwyn and the National Gallery of Australia for doing that. So the other thing about this site is that people hadn't yet learned to clean up. And digging by square metres, we looked at the density of all sorts of artefacts with this legend down the side. So the black squares go from nearly 3,000 to nearly 5,000 per square metre. So people was more or less dropping stuff where they left it, unlike later Neolithic sites with proper floors where they had to clean up or live in knee-deep in rubbish. These are soft, just basically land surfaces they're living on. They're not constructed floors. And all of the discs, the numbered discs, were caches and artefact clusters left in position where they'd been dropped or left, sorry, all those years ago. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those during the evening. Well, here they are now. Some of these are, just as they were left, caches of mortars and pestles as stacked up. Another curious thing is the frequent alignment of a plain and a fancy object. So you get a plain and a decorated pestle, and in the top left, you get a plain pestle, a zoomorphic pestle carved, nicely stacked up. So this was the kind of great preservation we got in a site where you had shrinking and swelling of clays for 14,000 years, lots of rodent burrowing, and lots of plant roots. And those rodent burrows, the Palestine mole rat, makes elaborate kind of tunnel systems. And I call this Swiss cheese taphonomy. Wherever they didn't get to remains. Where they dug out is gone. But it's like a holy matrix, with a lot of it preserved. One of the main finds was a big range of bone sickles, a new invention for harvesting wild plants. Over 90% of the sickles in the Natufian were found here. This was a double sickle. There are about 45 of them, a few complete and fragments. So, and the Natufian was more or less found in 1928 or discovered by Dorothy Garrett. And it was extraordinary, I think, that nearly 60 years later, because subsistence was such a key issue, the first archaeobotanical analysis, I believe, was put out by George Wilcox only in 1984, beating Willem van Zeist's publication of Irbid by a few weeks, I think. And then Sue College did a lot more extensive work, and although the remains weren't well preserved, she found a consistent presence of local grasses like wild barley, lentils, pistachio, and a range of small seeded plants which were collected. A very broad spectrum of animals was hunted in this period by raw number of fragments. Gazelle, like most of the sites, are always in the ascendancy. A small, conveniently sized antelope, and again, you see lots and lots of tortoise fragments always collected. Now I'll come to the lower phases we did from 2014 to 2016. So an aerial view of phase 2, where we still had apparently the original house being used in terms of its exterior wall, because some, although not all of those stones, articulate also with the phase 2 floor. We dug out this big platform in phase 1. This is the phase 1 pit. There's the sondage we dug out to bedrock, but there was nothing underneath it we could find. However, when we see feature 4, curiously, an apparently displaced feature of similar type, a sort of a stone platform here in the middle of the house. So there appeared to be some continuity there. To look at some of the key finds from this phase, in phase 1, most of the contacts were north-south in a variety of ways. But we see here a swing east-west or to the west, because we found for the first time, after 276 prior basaltic artefacts were recovered, the first zoomorphic basaltic pestle, rather like an animal hoof. I'm just going back to this idea that we failed to exhaust the cultural variability of the site. And that's like a couple of others from Al Wad Cave in Mount Carmel on the coast of the Mediterranean. And similarly, also providing a general link, was a zoomorphic or gazelle-headed bone sickle, which had been, the candle had been burnt, and it was the first of its type from Wadi Hammeh 27 after 48 prior sickle hafts had been found. And here is a parallel of the famous one from Kabara Cave. The inhabitants of Wadi Hammeh 27 were avid collectors. Like the Romans, they knew everything about every resource in their area. So Christophe Delage, our flint sourcing specialist, realised that most of the flint is a tan chert, and although there are abundant billions of cobbles in the Wadi, he would crack 200 of them and only find one. And he said, I can't imagine that they're cracking 200 these things to get one tan chert piece when they know they're going to be doing this for week after week. There must be a source they found, and he eventually found it in a secondary source of rolled chert pebbles in a layer in the Wadi Jirim, just below the mosque that Stephen was investigating for a possible Neolithic site. So they knew about that. Their red ochre is a very rare phosphatic sandstone. We know it exists because it's in the geological handbooks in the region. We can't find it. Our geologists can't find it. They did. So they knew everything about it. And they were avid fossil collectors. So we find the first case of a fossil sea urchin that's eroded from the limestone cliffs. And one of the things we then find is that these motifs appear to be repeated. They're taking inspiration from them. And they're on the little sickle half, they appear to be repeating this motif, the use of geometric decorations. So it seems that we have the inspiration of geometric decorations on artefacts from natural objects. To move now to phase 2, going from phase 2 to phase 3. In phase 3, we hit the first new house, and it's has a basal floor and a second floor, which is why we've divided into 2 phases. And here is a view of structure 3, the phase 3 house from above. We found a bit of it in the same phase, the sondage that Ben Churcher dug, and it more or less pretty well links up nicely. It runs inside the outer phase 1 wall, so it's smaller and concentrically aligned. And again, where you see feature 13, you have another one of these platforms popping up, and then again, 2 earlier stone circles in exactly the same place. Entrance through to the north rather than the west. Most curious was the appearance of dressed stones, probably some of the world's first dressed stone architecture in the northern part of the structure. Here you have it, 3 dressed limestone slabs set up against a rubble backing. This is exactly the same kind of construction as the much bigger decorated examples in phase 1. So it's the kind of precursor to them. And I'm interested to see if there's any link between this wonderful site of Shubaika 1, early Natufian site in East Jordan, first excavated or trialled in the mid-1990s by Sven Helms and Alison Betts, and then exhaustively excavated more recently by Tobias Richter from Copenhagen University. And you notice this extraordinarily beautifully put together floor of basalt slabs. This is in basalt country, and the walls are made of upright basalt slabs. Now, these aren't dressed, these are just naturally found bits of basalt. But I'm curious about the link between them because both sites date from the same period, and so the question arises as to cultural interaction between them. And the link, the positive link, is the importation of Mediterranean seashells into the hinterland of Jordan, and the natural route to go from the Mediterranean across to Jordan is very much up places like Wadi Hammeh 27. So that's one of the reasons we needed to get archaeomalacologist specialist involved, because we'd never really had a systematic analysis of our seashells. And we thought that we only ever had one type, the famous dentalian or tusk shell tubular thing. And so here is a big cache of these tusk shells. They're scaphoid shells with kind of tentacles out one end, and when they die, they leave a lovely tube, which you can string together as spaces or put it in jewellery. And now we have Associate Professor Patrick Faulkner, who's come in and begun the first systematic analysis and is a co-chief investigator on our project, analysing mollusks from Wadi Hammeh 27. He's already found a few more types. They're mainly tusk shells, but we have cockles, gastropods, dove shells, and arc clams from the sea, Mediterranean probably, and we even have a few freshwater mussels, which is really intriguing as to where that freshwater body was, which I'll come to in a minute. And like we know, these finds get taken away to the regional museum, which in our case is the as-Saraya Museum, Tel Irbid, in the centre of Irbid, the regional capital of the government we work in, and that's where the Department of Antiquities offices and museum is. So Patrick had to go up there and work between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m, because that's only when they're open, to work on many of these shells. And I was there some of the same time, working on some intriguing Natufian basaltic looted artefacts that I had happened to see a few years earlier before COVID. And this is the museum. It's the old Turkish Ottoman prison. And I found there a massive mortar, basaltic mortar, bigger than any one discovered in any Natufian site, with two massive pestles, and I wanted to do a bit of work on them. So the interesting thing is that only two sites have footed mortars, Malaha and Wadi Hammeh 27, and only Wadi Hammeh 27 has Natufian mortars of this type, particular type with that foot, and that after the Natufian period, no one ever made in the long history of the land basaltic artefacts like this, so they're restricted to that period. In fact, it's fair to say that the industry goes right downhill after the Natufian, and that you never find anything anywhere near as nice as that. So we were intrigued to do an analysis on them, and we knew that they'd been brought in referred by the Court of the Northern Jordan Valley, having been looted and recovered by the police from a police station that we don't know, no one knows who it was, there's no record. We knew the police station, probably could find out where it come from. And it was quite clear that a pick had found this as a long gouge mark. Now, if you're a professional excavator and you find something this precious, 14,000 years old, you'll probably stop and not dig into it again. But it had been turned over, and apparently with the broad part of the mattock, hit twice again. So we think that this is the work of illicit excavators from somewhere in northern Jordan. The pestles, massive pestles. We do have a couple of pestles, or one pestle that big from Wadi Hammeh 27. And here are the examples from Wadi Hammeh 27. I believe through any kind of formal typological analysis, they really probably come from Wadi Hammeh 27. I can see it, I can smell it. And if I could take a bite, I could probably take it from Wadi Hammeh 27. So we've just put an article out with Mohammed Dalgamoni and Serena Al-Shabaki on this work in the Jordan Journal for History and Archaeology. Mohammed being at the time, the curator of the museum and at the Irbid Department of Antiquities, and he's now the new inspector for Tabakat Fahel. And Serena Al-Shabaki works in the German Protestant Institute of Archaeology and is a superb illustrator. So Patrick and I were there, and the time came for lunch, and we wanted to get as much work in. So Irbid is a delightful town, I think, because unlike Amman with its endless array of Western fast food, new skyscrapers and endless flyovers, it's still a traditional town, although very big. What the Jordanians call baladi, or country style. And when you go down into the town, you can find traditional shops and in the souk, traditional cafes and restaurants. So we were faced with getting lunch, and we would have to succeed from our first shawarma or cafe, which only sold that, to find coffee. And we found an upstairs venue. I must say, when I'm thinking about it, we probably shouldn't have gone up there when there was a big sheet of paper with large handwritten letters, which I didn't Arabic, but an exclamation mark. And when you went up to the second stage, there was another with 2 exclamation marks. That sounded like a bit of a warning. We had a great time up there, and not only was smoking tolerated, it appeared to be mandatory. But thirdly, we wound up for dessert in the superb Al Jahrat bakery and cafe, which undoubtedly serves the best chocolate eclairs in the world. And on the serious side, there's some of Patrick's work on the left in the museum in Pella, doing a lot of USB microscopic work too. So we come back now to, we're in phase 3. And we had another new find in phase 2 and phase 3 we'd never noticed in all the previous excavation. Our first bone fish hook. And that means they're fishing. And where do the fish come from? After more than 400 square metres and over 600 bone artefacts retrieved, no fish bones had ever been retrieved from an assemblage of over 14,000 faunal specimens. No bone fish hooks, which are common near the coast, from over 600 bone artefacts. So we suddenly find a bone fish hook. And in phase 2, the fauna of which just before COVID was completely analysed by Anne Brideau of the CNRS in Paris, lots and lots of burnt fish bones and lots of burnt snake. So they're eating snake and fish, and the fish are probably trout. They're relatable to the salmonidae family. So that's a really intriguing find. And it again raised the question, where were the fish coming from if we had no lake or a saline lake? So the Structure 3 house was built over foundational burials. The lower floor articulates very well with the base of these slabs and all the rest of the wall stones. And the recurrent features kept on going. Feature 20, now another big stone platform with a massive post hole ringed by curved pieces of broken mortar. As though there was a big post hole there. And maybe that post hole held carvings or a flag. It was denoting something. And it's right outside this house. And it's continued through to the surface several hundred years later. And now we come to phase 4, upper phase 4 here. We've divided it upper and lower. We kept this architecture in place as a heritage, but it doesn't articulate with this surface. You'll see that that wall is now pedestal, and it's below this wall here. And a feature there which continued through, and these stones and artefacts like this big basalt pestle are lined over graves below it. We also see here to this phase the available radiocarbon dates. So indicating in the top phase around 12,000 BP or 12,000 calibrated BCE. And interestingly, from lower phase 3 and upper phase 4, not much difference. It appeared that these happened quite quickly. We'll talk about another couple of.
I love you.
Karen, are you back there?
Yeah, hang on a minute. It's being recorded.
So same story, these positions marked until the abandonment of the settlement 500 years later. And then when we get to the bottom, and this is travertine limestone, natural rock, we see that the inside of the house is pitted with big pits, including holding 3 burials, along with the one that we found earlier just outside the house, and ringed by a wall, no other burials outside it. And feature 20, the final one of these big platforms, when we dug into it again, was another really big, deep pit surrounded by stones and full of burnt material, as though fires have been burning there. Evidently, here are the carbon dates within the 2 pits. You'll see, as I said, they're very hard to get. And as you go further down and things are buried and better preserved, we get a few more. But you'll see that these dates are scarcely any earlier than the ones on the other 2 phases. So it appears that when these burials were filled in, quite rapidly, maybe even as a planned event, near that time, those houses were begun and continued for hundreds of years. And the burials are in red, and they define them with boundary markers with complex marker features in the blue or mauve. So these community 4 elders were evidently highly regarded because, as far as archaeological sampling can show, no one was ever buried in the village again. Instead, an interesting custom was that burnt human cremated cranial fragments are distributed in all of each phase in the interior of the houses. It's not something you lightly do, is to burn your family's body and sprinkle their remains in the deposit. But that's what happened. And it's there's a bit of it in some Natufian sites, but nothing to this extent. So at the end of 2016, we got to this point. We finished feature 29, which was another different type of burial I'll talk about. And we'd found 2 pits, feature 35 and feature 32, but we were never really confident that we'd got the edge of it where they were coming together. And that's where we left it until our 3rd tranche of excavations. As to the feature 29 burial, these were 2 children, almost certainly buried in shrouds or containers, one buried on top of the other, the lower one having a tusk shell necklace, and probably only with minutes between their deposition. And because of the archaeothanatological method and training of our expert bioanthropologist Fanny Bockentan, which notes the actual versus expected sequence of disarticulation of bones in corpses and what happens to them, together with the unexpected limits of bones very clearly at the edge of the burials, so there's something's been stopping them moving, the way that each of the crania rolled and there was a stone pillow underneath each of the heads that didn't go further, and the lack of any interpenetration of the 2 skeletons with each other indicates to Fanny that they were buried in containers. We're lucky to have Fanny. Fanny has inherited the directorship of Ain Malaha, She is the student of Francois Vella, who dug it since 1975, and Francois Vella was the student of Jean Perrot, who found the site in 1955 when the first Natufian village was found. So we come to the beginning of the 2022 season, and we thought that only 2 small pits had to be cleared, probably only a matter of a couple of weeks' work. I've always failed when I've thought it'll finish up quickly in this site, and it never has. Both had yielded traces of human bones. However, the 2 features coalesce to a great pit, a great death pit, containing a great multiple burial. We have 8 interments so far, pretty much at the surface, replete with a series of elaborate ornaments in the grave, and it's still going. So every one of these burials is different. There was the individual feature 8, the individual adult, the 2 children in feature 29. Stephen Burke dug on the edge of the settlement eroding in the mid-80s, a genuine secondary burial with disarticulated bones and skulls, obviously of different time periods. And now we have this multiple communal primary burial. And at the top of it was a cache of beautiful, elegant bone points. Again, new types. One of these is about 25 centimetres long, you see there, and maybe that's got something to do with the activities of the interred, one of the interred people. This cache of bone points is buried there. So this was really difficult to dig, and we were very lucky to have another Sydney staff member, Wendy Reid, to work alongside Fanny, because the only way Fanny could dig these is when Wendy consolidated each bone in turn in position before it could be lifted or analysed. Wendy's another person, by the way, who's been involved in Middle Eastern archaeology for 94% of the time, 50-year anniversary. And as we go down, you can see there were 4 skulls we found so far. It occurred, as far as we can tell so far, to Fanny that these are not secondary burial. These are actually flexed tightly with skeletons underneath them. And we see this mysterious dome-shaped limestone artefact on the edge of the pit, which we'll talk about a bit more later. And while Fanny will have to dig out every bone and look at how many people are there and so on, again, because of what I'll say next to, there's no disturbance of the lower burials by the upper ones, which is almost impossible to do if you're digging into sediment and putting new burials in. So she thinks, again, it must have been in a large, great container, a basket, a leather container, and that they are all put in at once, or they were uncovered and more were added over time. Because as we go down, it became apparent that this multiple burial is replete with late Ice Age jewellery of, again, new types we've never seen before. We have a tusk shell anklet, a complex necklace, and that looks like it might be worn by the person under its skull, but there's no mandible there. So that's really curious. There's a bird bone necklace. We never had a bird bone necklace ever before. A beautiful bone pendant and another tusk shell bracelet. So we don't know yet really whether they were worn by the deceased when they put them in there or added next to them. Here's a tusk shell bracelet, and according to Patrick, different species are included. This is found in situ. We found a beautiful bone pendant. All of the bone artefacts always have a well-preserved, almost subfossil, with this beautiful high burnished lustre, whereas the faunal fragments from animals' prey are always really poorly preserved. It's a new type again. We've never had one like this. So it seems to me there are kind of 2 tracks of artisanal production at Wadi Hammeh 27. and more generally in the Natufian. Certain things are very stereotyped, like these classic flint microliths called lunettes. They're barbs and points for projectiles, whether spears or bows. And this type of gazelle podial or toe bone bead, where you chop off the bottom one and you drill a hole through it. So these people were really keen on drilling, and they made a lot of these to string together. So that's one track. On the other hand, you get these kind of things where a lot of the bone pendants are either a new type or indeed unique, like most of the ones on the right-hand side. And here again, you might think, well, this was a bilobate kind of bird-shaped one like that one with feathers indicated. But it's curious that the eye, there's a hole here where the eye should be. And it's really curious that the bottom is incised as though to represent a beard. And when we have this new one. So we get this idiosyncratic kind of strain of pathway of art production or craft production. And we still can't exhaust the variability of the site, no matter how much we dig. Here is the complex necklace. It is composed of various kinds of tusk shells, bird tibiotarsal bones, and the waste products from the manufacture of the gazelle podial beads. Now, it wasn't entirely in situ, but every one of these finds was surveyed in, and you can see that it forms a cluster under this skull, but the mandible's missing. Now, here is what you're meant to do to get your bone beads, and you cut this bit off and drill it, and I'll leave with that. But they've put these bits in the necklace. And Gail Lados's reduction sequence from Wadi Hammeh 27 and other sites show that first you abrade the outside of the bone to weaken it, you shave it, you then drill a hole when you've got the whole thing, cut it off, and you use this bit, and that's thrown away. But these bits, to our surprise, are in the necklace. So it's interesting how we interpret things according to us from the etic or outside view, logically, but then there's the inside understanding, what you really do when you're in the society, the emic view. Interestingly enough, in this wonderful dilly bag among you were a series of gazelle toe bones ready to be made. And when these people were hunting, perhaps with their daily bag, sickle to harvest, a punch to make more stone tools, because this flint core is the same material as those lunettes, they probably sat there making this stuff while they were out on the range hunting. Occasionally, when we were out at Wadi Hammeh 27, and here's the plateau, here's a person walking up it to give you an idea of the scale. The site's at the other end. It's a plateau now, but it was a valley bottom like the Pella Wadi Hammeh, and this sequence has been carved into after the lake in the Jordan Valley desiccated at the end of the Ice Age. Occasionally, when we were out working there, in the morning, this eerie, dense fog would just roll in from almost nowhere, and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And it was cold. And you know how people say when they get haunted, they feel it very cold. You sort of felt that you might have become slightly unmoored in time. And I always fancied that a Natufian elder would come up to me in my face and saying, "What are you doing here? What do you want?" And I would reply, "I want to know why you're putting waste products into your beautiful necklace." And he would say, probably, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Finally, we got an articulated bird bone necklace lying in situ, and thanks to Patrick's USB microscope, extraordinarily enough, a bit of the original cordage sticking out of one of the beads. So 2023 and 2024 were survey and study seasons. And in 2024, we had Cara Stuntley, an MA student in conservation, from Durham doing a placement for her MA. And Wendy couldn't come that year. And it's really not easy to get conservators if they're any good. She did a wonderful job. And the first remains that came out were unequivocally from the pelvic notch, a really large male. This was the first adult male identified in a community of women, because paleogenetically, all the other adults, about 5, have been women in the burials so far discovered. Now, it's interesting that we have basalt, and the reason we can't test the basalt in as-Saraya to see if it came from Wadi Hammeh 27 or not is that we know that Wadi Hammeh 27 artisans used basalt from all of the 9 source regions in Western Jordan, because John Webb in our 2015 season sampled and identified 9 source areas, the length and breadth of the Jordan Valley, only around the Irbid area and Syrian border, but also significant ones along the Dead Sea and up in the Iraq Plateau. How do you get these large things that come from the Dead Sea carried up to the Jordan Valley? How do you get trout for dinner? And why did the landforms not incise in after the so-called Lausanne Lake desiccated a couple of thousand years before the Natufian period? And the answer was probably another lake on top that persisted called the Damia Lake, after type sections at the village of Damia. And this was produced by Jordanian geologist Abdul Qadir Irbid in the 1980s, but only in about 1-2 single short papers, and no more work was done on it. So we inaugurated a new PhD project with Natasha Nagel, who's been and has finished her 2 seasons of sampling. We've visited 21 locations in the Jordan Valley and sampled 21 geological sites. So we think there's a lake that goes right through to the end of 11,000 when it desiccated and those sequences dug back in, the wadis that were drying up, dug back in beside that Natufian plateau. It was an interesting time in 2023 and including during the Gaza war. Here's Natasha at work. We came across herds of goats, magnificent scenery, Bedouin children, helpful municipal staff, curious intelligence agents, and skeptical soldiers. And we were greatly enabled by, in the north of the Jordan Valley, it's just one market garden. It's really hard to get exposure. Adventitious building sites. Here in the middle of the town of Deir Allah, right next to the shops, was, fortunately for us, a stalled municipal building site that, over a big argument that had ceased. So there was a huge excavation, about 2 football fields, waiting to be looked at in section, 20,000 years of stratigraphy. It's a bit like when archaeologists think, isn't it wonderful you get an earthquake and seal everyone in? Actually, it's a terrible disaster for them. We benefit, So Natasha was able to do quite a bit of this work. And here is one of our type sites at a place called Malaha, means salty, near Damia, a massive gorge that goes for kilometres. And here below the red lines are the Lausanne sediments. Then there's a disturbed layer called a turbidite, which may be derived from immense currents of subaqueous water fueled by huge storms. And on top of it, more fine-scale lake bed deposits, the Damia Lake. And they're about 0.5 millimetre thick, and they go, the 2 of them every year, thousands of years. And this is what we've got: 138 kilograms of plastered oriented samples in situ that Natasha's brought back to Melbourne. We ran out of plaster bandage. You get plaster bandages and wet them. So we scoured every pharmacy in the length and breadth of the Jordan Valley, buying up every plaster bandage we can get. We know exactly who has them, who's got the best type. Heaven help you if you broke your leg and you were doing this work, because you wouldn't have been able to find plaster in any pharmacy. And we've been greatly aided by Dr. Saha Al-Hassana, who was a schoolgirl in the suburbs of Irbid, has worked her way up through her capabilities to open the first optical stimulated luminescence lab in Jordan. And she has already got back some dates from the Damia Lake sequence. I can't go into that. They're still being worked on by Natasha, but they definitely show the Damia Lake going up through and beyond the Natufian period. So to go on with a few of my other PhD students, I dug about 490,000 artefacts, stone artefacts in the top phase. Adam Valka for his PhD did all the phase 2, 3 and 4 and added the same number that he analysed. And his work is really intriguing. It's the first really big sample of an early Natufian sequence, and things are pretty much the same, but he sees a whole range of different, varied and sometimes conflicting changes slightly. What we call bell curves, things that get more popular and then die out a bit. Things called well curves, things that start popular and become less popular and come back. Codependent technological change. Certain artefact types rise when other ones do because they're dependent on their manufacture. And even what we might think is cultural drift, stochastic change where we can't really understand a reason for it except perhaps for fashion. And Adam also has an intriguing theory based on the stone tools to go along with these finds of caches in the top layer, which were in some sense abandoned, because you don't really find them in the lower phases, because of course people are settling those things and rebuilding. But the top one was abandoned. And he shows that in phase 1, the usable flint tools, not the broken rubbish, are 5 times more common, whole blades and whole flakes, in the top phase than all of the lower phases, which were sealed off. So it's an intriguing find which may point to an actual kind of catastrophic abandonment. And then to go on to Lauren Prosser, who's just completed recently a micromorphological analysis of the sediments at Wadi Hammeh 27. As my colleague Andy Herry said, we're always been finding stuff in the dirt, but archaeologists for a long time didn't analyse the dirt itself, their main matrix of discovery. And among other things, because Natufian sedentism has been ambiguous, whether they live there all the time, she presents, her work has been hailed by her examiners as one of the most important pieces of work ever undertaken on earlier sedentism. We're hoping to publish some articles with her soon. She can find no breaks, no erosive breaks between phases. There's no soil formation. There's no burrowing. There's no kind of cracking or root penetration. If you came across that sequence, if it was in the Iron Age, no one would think twice about it being a sedentary kind of continuous situation. She's also found that a large part of the sediment appears to be composed of collapsed piezo. It's not really piezo, but moulded, wetted earthen building materials, as though these houses were much more solid than we've ever thought. So that's really important work. And with due deference to, I hope, all the people watching on Zoom, Zoom's great. In COVID, I ran myself a Zoom series. And just recently, I've noticed our colleagues are sort of saying, you know, I keep watching Zoom lectures. I'm trying to get dinner on for the kids. I'm on the computer all the time. Let's go back to having 6 or 8 of us around the table for a lunchtime session where we meet. Because as the great Roger Daltrey of The Who says, so Roger Daltrey these days, computers are all very fine, but you really got to get out of the house once in a while and get inside. And of course, the human interaction and the meeting of people in conferences, in the live version, is really where it's all at. That's our instinct, that's our communication. And that, just before COVID, where I gave a previous talk here in Sydney, in the Pella at 40, was beneficial for that reason, meeting new students. That, by the way, was 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
That's 10% of the time that Jordan Unbelievably. So that's where I met our PhD student, Sarah Gingell from the University of Sydney, who arrived in Melbourne to take up her scholarship, and COVID hit. And bravely, she was there for 2 years before she could do much and go to Jordan. And we're very pleased to say that she's finished. She won in 2024 La Trobe's Nancy Millis Medal, awarded to the authors of outstanding doctoral theses. And this is on our other PPNA site, not Wadi Hammeh 27. One of the things we've been doing in the site in the last few years as teaching materials, but also kind of heritage for the site in the long future, is making a series of short video documentaries for of various subjects. And the last series we did was everyone on the site, the team interviewing somebody else, and you know, the students and their story, how they got there, the staff, the specialists. And this one I'd like to show close to closing is where talks to Patrick and talks about how she got involved. And it's interesting to show also a lot of footage about this multiple burial. So I'll see if I can get that started now.
We're here talking to Sarah Gingell, postgraduate student at La Trobe University, who's working with Phillip Edwards as her supervisor.
Do I turn it up?
Sarah's here working on the Wadi Hammeh 27 site, 12,000 BCE.
Maybe I can turn it up here with me too. Right. Oh, yeah, it'll be good time. Okay.
We're here talking to Sarah Gingell, postgraduate student at La Trobe University, who's working with Phillip Edwards as her supervisor. Sarah's here working on the Wadi Hammeh 27 site, 12,000 BCE, as a part of our project on the earliest village. So Sarah.
Hey, back.
How you doing? Good, good. So given that you've been working here for the last 5 or 6 weeks as a part of this project, can you just give us a bit of a rundown on what your role's been as part of the field team?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've been lucky to sort of be here throughout the whole project, sort of see it from beginning to end for this season, which is really nice. And I've been working as part of the excavation team, starting working with Dr. Alex Mikhailovich. We were excavating 2 features next to each other. And then when we started to find human burial, realised that we've got a larger communal burial feature. And that's luckily when Dr. Fanny Bockentine arrived. And I was helping her excavate that feature, along with sort of excavating and recording. We luckily had Brian Armstrong with us for the first few weeks, and he taught me how to use the total station and how to do photogrammetry. So after he left a couple of weeks ago, I took on that role, which has been really, really fun. It's great to sort of have so much data coming in each day to really record the site in a lot of detail. Archaeology in terms of excavation is obviously quite destructive, so the more information we can get out in terms of recording, the more we can sort of analyze later on, and seeing that each day with the total station photogrammetry has been really fun. So yeah, I think excavation and total station and things like that being my main roles.
Good. Thankfully, you haven't turned your attention to the shell. Otherwise, I'd be out of a job, wouldn't I?
But we've been finding some shell for you, perhaps.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's always good. Were you always interested in doing archaeology? What brought you to do
Yeah,
this?
I really always was. I'm not entirely sure why. I think I always loved learning history when I was very young. And then I watched a documentary on shipwreck diving and thought I'd like to do that when I was about 12 years old. And then just as it went on, I really wanted to do marine archaeology. But then when I first started studying at university, I realized I liked the really old stuff. And then I was very lucky to volunteer on an excavation in Jordan when I was 19 and just completely fell in love with Jordan. So then wanted to do archaeology here. And yeah, just sort of as my degree went on, sort of started to focus in more on what I really wanted to learn more about and research. And very luckily I can do that in Jordan because there's lots of early Neolithic sites here that are very fascinating.
Well, we might come back to that shortly as well, because I want to ask you about your PhD.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask was why Jordan in the Middle East? Kind of covered that
Yeah.
to a large degree, so well done. I mean, it has been a long-term interest, probably since that initial field season.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just I think I thought I'd want to try lots of different countries in terms of doing archaeology, and I have worked a lot in Australia. But in terms of research, I probably should expand my horizons a bit, but I just love coming to Jordan. I love working here, I love traveling here. Always feel so welcome. Food's amazing, the people are amazing. It's just it's a beautiful, beautiful country.
But
No, archaeology. So I had to give that up. So I did like scuba diving, but not enough. I prefer digging on ground.
So with the work that you've been doing as part of the project, any highlights over the last few weeks?
So I mean, the communal burial is obviously just incredible. The finds that are coming out of it, articulated bead necklace, it's just bracelet is just astounding. It was so lovely to get to work with Fanny and learn a lot from her. Just the whole team, working with the whole team has been such a highlight, such lovely people. And yeah, I think I've learned a lot in terms of photogrammetry and the total station. I think that's really awesome. There's actually just so many like little things, but I can't think of what. It's been a great time.
Yeah. I totally get where you're coming from. Yeah, that's good. All right, so let's briefly talk about your PhD.
Sure.
Okay, so you're not working on Wadi Hammeh 27
No.
PhD.
No.
So what are you actually doing?
Yeah.
Is there a connection between the PhD research and what's happening with this project?
Not really, unfortunately, because my PhD is looking at an early Neolithic site, which was occupied a good sort of 3,000 to 4,000 years later than Wadi Hammeh 27, and it's located much further south near the Dead Sea. It's called Zara 2, and it's a really important early Neolithic site. It's a pre-pottery Neolithic age site, and it sort of expands the dating of this period in the southern Levant. And it's sort of interesting to understand what's happening in terms of this early Neolithic period. It's almost, it's talked about as a revolution, a transition, beginnings of agriculture, and it's an important site for understanding what's going on in the southern Levant compared to the north. And I'm doing an artifact distribution analysis of the site. So it was excavated 20 years ago by Phillip and his team. And most of the sort of material has been looked at, except for the third season of excavation. So while I'm here, luckily, because the assemblage is here, in the evenings I've also been looking at the lithic assemblage and sorting it so that I can complete the artifact distribution analysis. So essentially seeing if there are clusters of certain artifact types at the site, if that changes through time at all. We've definitely got some really interesting activity areas. And yeah, it's a significant site because there's evidence for early cultivation. So there's not necessarily full-on agriculture going on, whatever that means, but pre-domestication cultivation of barley and lentils nearby the site. lots of groundstone tools. And we've got these sort of neat little hearths with them one structures where there's sort of interesting things going on in terms of clusters of artifact types. And yes, so I'm blabbing on a bit about that now, but yeah, it's a cool site.
And one or two lithics to work on?
Yeah, just about 80,000 or so. We're getting there.
That'll be adequate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some chips and chunks.
Yeah. So having been out to the site a couple of times, while you guys have been excavating in the morning, there's been one particular feature within the excavation that, you've really thought about in earnest, haven't you? And have an interpretation. Would you like to explain what that is?
Interpretation, imagination. So there's this lovely stone, circular stone. And I think it's important in archaeology. It's a very scientific discipline. But it's okay to have a bit of interpretation sometimes of some things with minimal factual basis, as long as we are aware of that and don't publish it. But yeah, there's a lovely, beautiful stone bowl that we took out yesterday. It's not complete. It was probably in the process of being made, but for a while we did refer to it as the turtle god stone, hoping that it would be inscribed with some kind of turtle hat.
But it's not, is it? No.
But
No.
dream. So we don't know that they weren't intending to do that.
So pretty much forever, that will be the turtle god stone.
To me, yes,
Yeah.
it will be.
Okay, good. All right, so the last question I have for you, because Sarah and I have known each other for a reasonable amount of time. Who's your favourite lecturer in undergraduate?
You should ask.
Question, isn't it?
Believe it or not, it was Professor Pat. Newly promoted Associate Professor Pat, everyone.
It's true. All right, you get paid later. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Finish up by acknowledging our team through this period. I won't go through the names. In 2022, he was our team of Australian and international staff and students and local people. And then it's becoming harder and harder to get the traditional dig photo with everyone together. The old days where people went away for 2 months and had no contact with email or the phone, you could only get the occasional aerogram, the things you'd open up. I well remember Russell Workman at Pella getting one from his aged auntie with a dress which got there 3 weeks later. And when he opened it up, she'd forgot to actually write anything in it. We have to take photos in shifts. So in 2023 and 2024, it's really hard because people now have got complex lives. They're specialists. They could only afford a couple of weeks. Something on email or the mobile will drag you back home anyway. But there really were everyone on the team. And thanks to Photoshop, managed to get the whole team in. So I'll leave you to ponder our full team for 2024 and thank you for coming along tonight.